Y ahora ya sí, saludamos, como decimos, a Timothy Fiore, es chair en el ISM Manufacturing PMI. Timothy, thank you so much for having us a few minutes. Good afternoon from Spain, and I beg your pardon for this delay.
Oh, no problem, Martha. Good to be with you.
Timothy, important data we've known today, 49 points, the manufacturing ISM. In your report, we see contraction in the manufacturing sector activity in the US, which is the main reading we must do about this data.
Okay, thank you. So yes, we ended a 29-month streak of expansion in the manufacturing economy in the United States. Manufacturing economy in the United States tends to lead the service economy, and it tends to be a great indicator of what the future looks like for the US economy. So, and we're very cyclical. We come up, we come down. We've averaged about a 33, 34-month cycle over the last 5 cycles, going back 20 years. And this month, this cycle, we didn't quite make the average. So we had 8 of the 10 sub-indexes that go into the manufacturing PMI actually contract for the month. And we've, as your listeners know, I look at this from a demand, a output, and an input standpoint. Our input side, supplier deliveries and prices, getting better month to month. We have somewhere around 80% of our respondents reporting the same or faster deliveries from their suppliers. And we have 88% of the respondents reporting the same or lower prices from their suppliers in the month of November. So the input side is not an issue. On the demand side, we've seen a sagging of demand for the last 7 months. Due to over ordering back in the peak of the pandemic period, where our panelist companies were required to place orders at extra long lead times and at very high prices. In the summer of this year, they stopped doing that, anticipating that lead times would come down and prices would come down too. As I just mentioned, prices are coming down, maybe not as fast as we all would like, but they're coming down nonetheless. And the lead times in the month of November actually on manufacturing material contracted almost 9%. Which is good. In the prior 2 or 3 months before that, they contracted about 9% too. So we've taken almost 20% out of the manufacturing lead times in the last four months. Not enough, but definitely better. So our demand side is sluggish. It's so sluggish that we're consuming our backlog now. Our backlog number came in at 40, contracting pretty heavily. We peaked in the center of the pandemic recovery at around 65. So we've lost 25 points on backlog. So most of our panelist companies now are working on existing orders that most likely are overdue to their customers. The other interesting thing on demand is that we watch the customer inventory number. That's an indication from our panelist companies of how much of our panelist companies' inventories their customers have. And we had 30 some odd months of way too low. We had 20 some odd months of under 40, which is way too low. And we're now at a 48 or something, which is just about right. So our customers have as much of our material as they really want. Our supply chain ordering streams have been decreased over the last 7 months because we're not continuing to order at extended lead times. And our manufacturing inventory at a 51 is relatively respectable, not too high, maybe a little bit too low. So it really feels like the manufacturing economy has gotten through the over-ordering period without a lot of pain to their suppliers or a lot of pain to their customers or a lot of pain to themselves. And I think we're now entering a period of time where we can really get true demand, true future demand coming back into the cycle so that we can then proceed with production and output.
Timothy, as you said, we are saying goodbye to 29 consecutive months of growth. The manufacturing sector contracted this month for the first time since May 2020. One question we are wondering now is to what extent does this contraction herald an immediate US recession?
So, well, it remains to be seen. I mean, I think, you know, if about half the time that manufacturing goes into a contraction, there's a U.S. recession. That's not to mean that this time around that will happen, but I think with the U.S. Federal Reserve raising interest rates, you know, fairly aggressively here, they're still accommodative, but they're going to become restrictive probably by the time we close the year. That we're probably looking at some kind of recession. I don't think at this point, from the manufacturing standpoint, it's not going to be a hard recession. As I've been mentioning the last couple of months to your listeners, I think the PMI is going to end up in the 48 to 52 range, and we came in at 49. Last month, we were about 51. So I don't really see that changing much. What did change in the month of November, though, as your listeners know, I tracked the hire to fire ratio in our employment comments. How many of our comments are talking about hiring and how many are talking about firing? And the firing is really freezing employment levels, attriting down to lower levels or actual layoffs. Up until November, every activity, we were running at a 2-to-1, meaning for every 3 companies, 2 were still hiring, 1 was freezing or attriting down. In the month of November, that 2-to-1 ratio remains, but this time layoffs are clear. 14% of my employment comments indicated that the companies are laying off now. So, and I think the reason for that is that nobody really wants to lay off during the Christmas period. They really don't want their employees out there spending money and then finding that they don't have a job. So there were some early actions taken in November. And like I've been saying for a couple of months, I think the real question here, what does the first quarter of 2023 look like? And it's still a bit of a question, but I think lead times are coming down, prices have come down, order streams have been reduced due to lack of ordering. We're now eating into backlog. That should drive sellers back to the table with buyers to negotiate reasonable prices and reasonable lead times. And hopefully in the month of January and February, we'll start to see that new order level come back up.
Timothy, you said probably we won't see a hard recession in the US, and Jerome Powell said yesterday, well, he spoke yesterday, and he talked about a soft landing, that it's possible yet, and he talked about the possibility of dodging the recession. Do you see from the ISM this scenario probable that it's viable?
Well, I think all the indications from the manufacturing side are indicating a soft landing. That doesn't really mean that there will be a soft landing. I think in order to get wage growth under control, there needs to be a reduction in workforce headcount on the payroll. So that's the only way to really do it. Unless there's a reduction in headcount payrolls, you're not going to see wages come down. And in the end, that's the basis for inflation, is wage growth. And the Federal Reserve has been very clear that they don't want wage growth to be a self-fulfilling prophecy, meaning that inflation is at 8% and you're getting a 5% raise, you're going to go back to your employer and say, you're not covering my costs, I need another 3%. And when that happens, things kind of eat on themselves. So I don't think we're there yet. I think the action that they've taken in 2022 was very appropriate. There's indications that the month of December will be a little bit softer than what they've done the last 3 times, which is probably good. My guess is that they're probably trying to wait a little bit to see what happens as we go into Q1. But I think from a supply chain standpoint, manufacturing, we've cleaned out all the issues that we developed during the pandemic. Prices are coming down. Lead times are down almost 20%. We have sellers that are much more interested in coming back to buyers to negotiate reasonable orders. They're not sitting with super powerful positions like they were for the last 24 months. And of course, buyers want to be able to be sure that they can access their material at reasonable prices. So I think we're getting back in. I probably mentioned a couple of months ago that the pandemic period in the United States, manufacturing has gone away outside of new export orders and what's happening in China. And I really feel that way. So I think we've kind of cleaned things up, and we spent the second half of 2022 doing that. December will probably be another 48 to 52 month. And I'm really anxious to see what demand's going to do in the January, February timeframe as we reload all of our orders for 2023 performance.
Timothy, Fiore, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, as always. Thank you.
Good to see you, Marta. Thank you very much.